Last month, on the 14th of January, a friend called Rene and I discussed will, fate, and their place in Bhagavan's teachings. And I posted a video of that discussion on this YouTube channel. A friend called Evan Cary wrote 2 comments on that video. So this video is to answer those comments of Evan. His first comment referred to another comment in which another friend had quoted, supposedly quoted Schopenhauer as saying, "A man can do as he wills, but cannot will as he wills." This is not these exact words, but this is an idea that was expressed by Einstein, and he attributed it to Schopenhauer. I think a more accurate translation of what Einstein wrote was Einstein had written. He'd written in German, but what it means in English is, "I do not believe in the freedom of the will." Schopenhauer's words, quotation, "The human being can do what he wants, but he cannot want what he wants," end of quotation, accompany me at all situations throughout my life and reconcile me with the actions of others, even if they are rather painful to me. This awareness of the unfreedom of the will keeps me from taking myself and my fellow men too seriously as acting and deciding individuals, and from losing my temper. Einstein wrote this in an article he wrote. The article was called Mein, I don't know how it is pronounced in German, but it means in English. He wrote it in August 1932. I think it was written for, was part of a brief talk that he gave. The meaning of the title is My Creed. My Creed, in other words, what I believe. It was written by him in German in August 1932. As I say, he attributes to Schopenhauer the words, "The human being can do what he wants, but cannot want what he wants." It seems that these are not actually words that Schopenhauer, he summarized his understanding of Schopenhauer's philosophy on the subject of free will. But I think this wasn't actually what Schopenhauer said. So when this is something that people often quote. So when when a friend quoted this recently on that particular video, in a comment on that particular video, I wrote a comment in reply saying, these words were wrongly attributed to Schopenhauer by Einstein, and both Einstein's and Schopenhauer's ideas in this regard are contrary to the simple and logical teachings that Bhagavan gave us about the nature of ego and its will. And then I refer to an article that I wrote a couple of years ago. The article is called, the title of the article, it was an article I posted on my blog on the 1st of September 2018. And the title of the article was, "Like everything else, karma is created solely by ego's misuse of its will, chittam. So what needs to be rectified in it is its will." This was a very long article, and because this quotation of Einstein that he attributed to Schopenhauer is often quoted, in the 35th and 36th sections of that article. In section 35, I wrote, the title of that section was, "Einstein was wrong to believe that we cannot want what we want and that our will is therefore not free." And section 36 is, "Schopenhauer believed that the will is not free because there must be sufficient reason for it. But the nature of ego is the sole reason for it. So it has no external cause and is therefore free." Those are 2 long sections. I won't go into them in detail now, but anyone who's interested can refer to to that article, and particularly to those those two sections. So I referred to these sections in that comment, in the reply I wrote to this person who quoted Schopenhauer in the comment on on that video of my discussion with Rene. Referring to this, Evan Cary wrote in one comment, "Great video, Michael. Thanks for the upload. I see you're not a fan of Schopenhauer. How about Spinoza? I find there is a lot of overlap in Spinoza's monist outlook and Advaita. Sure, Ramana did a better job at describing phenomenology, making use of a mountain of concepts his culture had generated over thousands of years. And he was, of course, a jnani. But considering how little access Spinoza had to Eastern literature in his day, I think he produced some interesting stuff. What do you think of his ethics? How about this quote, which is somewhat related to a falsely attributed Schopenhauer-via-Einstein quote? And then he quotes, this is, I believe, I assume this a passage from Spinoza. What Spinoza seems to have said is, again, it is not within the free power of the mind to remember or forget at will. The decisions of the mind arise in the mind by way of the same necessity as ideas of things actually existing. Those who, I mean, it seems there's a later portion of the same passage he wrote, those who believe that they speak or keep in silence or act in any way from the free decision of their mind but do dream with their eyes open. That's the end of a quotation from Spinoza. And then Evan continues, what are your thoughts? If Bhagavan said the person willingly dropped the fan is only their destiny chosen by the ordainer, shouldn't speaking, keeping silence, or acting in any way from free decision of their mind fall into the same category? Love to hear your take on it if you have time. Keep up the great uploads. So that's what Evan had written, and this is my answer to it. Firstly, Evan, you say that I'm not a fan of Schopenhauer. I'm neither a fan nor not a fan. I actually know very little about Western philosophy and Western philosophers. I'm also not interested in philosophers per se. I'm interested in ideas and the arguments they give for their ideas. So I may well agree with many of Schopenhauer's ideas if I were to read his works, but I haven't read them. I did refer, because this quotation is often attributed to Schopenhauer, I tried to find out in what context he said it. That is the quotation that Einstein attributed to him. I tried to find out in what context he said it, and I found out that there's a lot online saying that actually Schopenhauer never said that. And so I did a bit of research to see what his views on free will were. His view was that there cannot be free will because everything must have a sufficient, there's a principle in Western philosophy, it seems, the principle of sufficient reason. Everything must have sufficient reason. There can't be anything without sufficient reason. That's his argument. And therefore, he thought there's no sufficient reason for the will, and therefore will is not free, something to that effect. I've written in more detail in that article. I disagree with this particular idea for reasons that I give in that article, but it's not that I've anything against Schopenhauer. This particular idea, I disagree with him, the argument he gave. I thought it wasn't, in the light of Bhagavan's teachings, his argument didn't stand. Regarding Spinoza, I've heard of Spinoza, but I've not actually read anything of Spinoza. So I know some people think that his views are somewhat related to, somewhat similar to Advaita in some respects. Perhaps I don't know enough about him. But regarding this particular question, this particular quotation that Evan refers to, That is, again, it is not within the free power of the mind to remember or forget a thing at will. The decisions of the mind arise in the mind by the same necessity as the ideas of things actually existing. Those who believe that they speak or keep silent, or keep in silence, or act in any way from a free decision of their mind, do but dream with their eyes open. And then everyone wants to know my thoughts on this. That is, there's a lot of confusion about free will. In fact, the English term free will is particularly unhelpful. And I'm surprised that philosophers haven't dissected the idea more. There are various issues. The first thing we need to consider is, do we have a will? And I think everyone will agree that we do have a will. We have likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, fears, and so on. So it would be hard to argue that we have no will. That is, I think it's reasonable to accept that we have a will. The question is whether that will is free or not. Generally, the term free will in English is, when people talk about free will, they're not actually talking about freedom of will. They're talking about freedom of action. That is the freedom to do what we want. So that is not actually free will, that is freedom of action. Freedom of action, whether or not there's freedom of action, is another issue. First, we need to decide whether the will itself is free or not. What is meant when we talk about the will being free? What is the will? The will is only the sum total of all our desires, attachments, likes, dislikes, and so on. According to Bhagavan's teachings, all the five sheaths are not I. The subtlest of the five sheaths, the so-called Annamaya Kosha, or Karana Sarira, the causal body, consists of vasanas. So that is in effect the will. It is what is also called chittam, that part of that function of the mind that contains all the vishaya vasanas, as is generally explained. Vasanas means our inclinations. Vasanas are what give rise to or what manifest as likes, dislikes, desires, and so on. In other words, there are desires and so on in their seed form. That is, in their seed form means in their subtlest form. That is, we have so many inclinations. Bhagavan generally referred to, the term Bhagavan often used is Vishaya Vasana. Vishaya means phenomena. Vishaya Vasana means an inclination towards phenomena. So that is the outward going inclinations of our mind. Those outward inclinations, the first form in which they manifest are likes and dislikes. And the slightly grosser one is desires, attachments, and so on. So the will, there are various levels of the will. The grossest level is all our desires, attachments, and so on. Subtler than that is the vasanas that give rise to these desires. And these vasanas are, according to Bhagavan, vasanas sprout not only as the likes, dislikes, desires, and so on, they also, a grosser manifestation of our vasanas is our thoughts. And a grosser manifestation still is the whole universe. According to Bhagavan, the world is nothing but thoughts. And those thoughts are nothing but the rising of our Vishaya Vasanas. So ultimately, everything comes back to Vishaya Vasanas. That is why the Vishaya Vasanas, the sum total of all Vasanas, are called the Karana Sarira. Karana Sarira means the causal body. That is the subtlest of the five sheaths. So this is the nature of the will. The will in its subtlest form is vasanas. But whose vasanas are they? They're only ego's vasanas. So it is ego's will. So when we talk about freedom of will, it's not the vasanas are free, it's whether we are free to to want what we want, as Einstein put it. Einstein argued that Einstein misquoted Schopenhauer as saying, we are not free to want what we want. But actually, if you consider it, that is absurd, because naturally we all want what we want and we don't want what we don't want. That's a tautology. So the fact that we want what we want is, if that is what is meant by freedom of will, yes, we are free to want whatever we want, and we're free to not want whatever we don't want. So the will in its subtlest form are the vasanas. And vasanas are just our inclinations. They're jada. That means they have no awareness of their own. So whose inclinations are they? They're our inclinations. That is, as ego, we have certain inclinations. And those inclinations give rise to our likes, dislikes, and desires, and so on, and eventually to all phenomena. The seed from which all phenomena sprout are our vasanas. Because they don't exist independent of ourself, or of ourself as ego, that is, vasanas have no freedom of their own. It's whether we are free to want what we want or not. Obviously, we do want what we want, so we are free. So are we? Often it is. Often when people hear about vasanas, they think we are a helpless victim of vasanas, that we are not responsible for our actions because our actions are driven by our vasanas. That's one view some people have. That is a misunderstanding. That is, it is our inclinations. We are free either to follow our vasanas or not to follow them. That is, we may have an inclination to think in a certain way or to act in a certain way, but our vasanas cannot compel us to act according to them. We decide whether we are going to yield ourselves to our vasanas or not. So ultimately, when it's talked about freedom of will, it's we are free to yield to our vasanas or not yield to our vasanas. That's what freedom of will ultimately comes down to. And Bhagavan, according to Bhagavan's teaching, that freedom of will is absolutely fundamental. We are free, though we are influenced by our vasanas, we are not bound by them. If we were bound to act according to our vasanas, we would have no freedom at all. We wouldn't be able to do any spiritual practice or anything. So, as Bhagavan said in one answer in talks, he said, all sastras, all spiritual instructions, all spiritual texts are based on the fact that we do have freedom of will. Because if we had no freedom of will, we wouldn't be free to follow any of the instructions that are given. So freedom of will is absolutely essential to any form of spiritual practice. Those people who think that we don't have freedom of will, they think that they look outside for causation. They think causation begins from outside. Things that whatever we are now experiencing is the result of previous things. And so it's all outside us. We are born into this world, which already existed before us. And we are therefore we are therefore the result of previous actions. And it's the people who believe in hard determinism are generally materialists. Bhagavan's teaching gives us a completely different view. Nothing is caused externally. The cause for everything, the root cause for everything is ego. As Bhagavan says in verse 26 of Uludnaptu, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Ego itself is everything. So ego is the first cause, the cause of all other causes. So even the vasanas, can vasanas exist independent of us? Who has vasanas? It's only we as ego who have vasanas. Vasanas simply means inclinations. As ego, we are inclined to in certain ways. Why most of our inclinations are outward directed. That's the Vishaya vasanas. Why do we have Vishaya vasanas? Because of a wrong belief that our happiness and misery are caused externally. We think that if we experience such and such a thing, we will be happy. If we experience something else, we'll be unhappy. So we like those things which will make us happy, and we dislike those things that will make us unhappy. But why do we experience happiness when we achieve the things that we like? Because that desire for that thing is an agitation of the mind. When that desire is satisfied, the mind is calmed down, and the happiness that is our own real nature shines forth. But we, due to our avivika, as Bhagavan says in the 14th paragraph of Nana, avivika means our lack of judgment, our lack of discrimination. We wrongly think the happiness is coming from those external things. So we desire them. So Vishaya vasanas are rooted in our lack of clarity, of lack of a clear awareness of ourselves. If we were aware of ourselves as we actually are, what we actually are is infinite happiness. If we were aware of ourselves as infinite happiness, we wouldn't have any likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, or any inclination to go outwards. We have inclination to go outward because we wrongly think happiness lies outside ourselves. So who is the cause of all these vasanas? It's only we as ego with our wrong judgment. We wrongly judge that we will attain, that happiness is attainable from external things other than ourselves. So our mind goes out towards those things. Some things we like, the things that we think will make us happy, we like. The things that we won't make us happy, we dislike. And so the will originates only from the ego. It's ego's will. So ego is perfectly free to want whatever it wants. Nothing, there's no one and no thing can compel us to want anything we don't want or to not want what we do want. So the cause is not, we shouldn't be looking for the cause for things outside ourselves. We need to look for the cause inside ourselves. And the first cause of everything is ego. That is the fundamental principle of Bhagavan's teachings. So what is the cause of our will? It is ourself as ego, and that is the nature of ego. Because what is our real nature? Our real nature is infinite happiness. But as ego, we limit ourselves because we take the form of a body. That as Bhagavan said, the body is a form of 5 sheaths. So body here means the physical, not just the physical form, but the life, the mind, the intellect, and the will. These 5 are the 5 sheaths. As ego, we experience these 5 collectively as ourself. So, because we experience these things as ourself, these are limited in time, in space, and so on. So we experience ourselves as something limited. As this finite ego, we cannot experience the infinite happiness that we really are. In order to experience the infinite happiness that we really are, we need to know what we actually are. When we're aware of ourselves as we actually are, what is ego? Ego is nothing but a false awareness, but is always aware of itself as I am this body. So when we're aware of ourselves as we actually are, we will no longer be ego. We will remain as we actually are. It's a pure awareness that we actually are. That pure awareness is infinite happiness. So the happiness we are seeking outside actually is our own real nature. Because we have limited ourselves, we are unable to experience the infinite happiness that we actually are. So we are constantly dissatisfied. Because we don't experience the happiness we actually are within ourselves, we think we can attain it from things outside. That is, as a finite awareness, we feel what our real nature is infinite whole. But now we experience ourselves as a finite entity, and we see so many things that seem to be other than ourselves. So we think, if I get this, if I get that, then I will be happy. So it is the very nature of ego to have outward going inclinations. In other words, Vishaya Vasana, they have the very nature of ego. In order to get rid of all our Vishaya Vasanas, we need to get rid of ego. But why we are not willing to surrender ego now? Because of our strong outward going inclinations. Bhagavan has, in Nana, he compares the vasanas to enemies within a fortress. If you're besieging a fortress, so long as the enemy remain inside the fortress, their food and water supply will quickly run out. They have to come out in order to get food and water. So long as you're besieging the fortress, they will continue coming out. Why they're coming out? They're coming out to get food and water. That's the analogy Bhagavan uses. Bhagavan doesn't mention they're coming out for food and water, but that's what we have to understand. So why do the vasanas come out? Because the vasanas cannot live without our attention. They thrive on our attention. By taking our attention away from ourselves towards other things, that is the food on which the vasanas live. So long as we've got the fortress of our heart, we've got it besieged by being self-attentive, they will keep on coming out. And the more if we cling fast to self-attentiveness, Bhagavan said they will all be destroyed. So, but whether we cling to self-attentiveness or whether we allow ourselves to be carried away by our vasanas, it's up to us. So we have that freedom to choose whether to cling to self-attentiveness or to allow ourselves to be swept away by our vasanas. If we allow ourselves to be swept away by our vasanas, we have many different vasanas. That is, we have, there are many things we like. Many of the things we like conflict with each other. We like, that is, the things that we like are incompatible with one another. For example, we may like to be fit and healthy, but we also like to eat lots of tasty food. If we eat too much tasty food, that's going to make us sick and unhealthy. So these desires, the desire to be slim and fit and healthy, and the desire to enjoy lots of tasty food, these desires are conflicting. So when we allow our mind to go outwards, vasanas are pulling us in many different directions. We are free to decide whether we follow this vasana or this vasana, whether we, so because the vasanas are nothing but our own inclinations, we have the freedom to decide which inclinations to follow, which inclinations not to follow. If we are wise, we should cultivate the inclination to go within. That inclination to go within is called satvasana. It's also called love for our real nature, love to be as we actually are. If we cultivate that vasana by the practice of self-investigation and self-surrender, that vasana will grow stronger, other vasanas will grow weaker. So we have that freedom. That's absolutely fundamental. If we didn't have that freedom of will, we couldn't do any spiritual practice. Why do we have that freedom of will? Because what we actually are is the unlimited whole. So there's nothing other than ourselves to limit our freedom. Now we ourselves have limited ourselves as this finite body. So everything seems to us to be limited, but actually our real nature is unlimited. So our freedom, though now our freedom seems to be limited, freedom is our very nature, because what is our real nature? Our real nature is the one infinite whole. Since there's nothing other than the one infinite whole, there is nothing other than ourselves that could limit our freedom. So we are infinitely free in our real nature. As ego, we have a reflection of that infinite freedom, which is our real nature. We experience a reflection of that. That is not the freedom in its fullness, but freedom in a limited form we experience as ego. This is fundamental to Bhagavan's teachings. And those who say the will is not free, when we say something is not free, that means there are external constraints. There's something other than that is preventing it. But things, external things are not, the cause of everything lies within ourselves, not outside ourselves. Whatever we experience outside, whatever seems to be outside, seems to be other than ourselves, according to Bhagavan, it's nothing but a projection of our own vasanas. So our will is the root of everything, is the basis of everything. And the root of the will is ourself as ego. So we do have freedom of will. This quotation of Spinoza, it is not within the free power of the mind to remember or forget a thing at will. But I mean, he says the decisions of the mind arise in the mind by the same necessity as the ideas of things actually existing. That is, whatever thoughts arise in our mind, they are nothing but the blossoming of the sprouting of our Vishaya vasanas. So so everything originates from our will. Whether that is when our vasanas sprout as thoughts, we are free either to follow those vasanas, to follow the thoughts, or to turn our attention back within. Or we are free, supposing some thoughts come to our mind, supposing we have some thought to do something bad, let's say rob a bank or something. That thought may occur to us, or if I could just, supposing there's some opportunity, we have to get money by an easy means to get money by dishonest means. It may be very tempting. We may feel inclined, oh yes, nobody will know if I just take this money, nobody will know, and it won't do any harm to anyone. So why don't I just do it? We may have an inclination to do that, but then our conscience will prick us. No, this isn't our money. We shouldn't take it. If we take what belongs to others, someone is somewhere along the line is going to suffer. So we have inclinations pulling us in different directions. Then eventually we may decide, okay, no, I shouldn't do this. This is not the proper thing to do. So but it's up to us whether we follow this inclination or that inclination. Is always we are free to follow whichever inclination that is, it's we who determine which inclination we follow at each moment, whether we follow the inclination to go back within or the inclination to go outwards. And if we follow the inclination to go outwards, whether to go out in this direction or that direction, but there's so many vasanas are pulling us in so many different directions. We are free to decide which of the vasanas we yield to and which of the vasanas we don't yield to. So we do have that freedom of will. And that is another point. That is, when people talk about free will, they generally, as Spinoza is talking about here, he's talking about decisions. When we make a decision, of course, there are different levels of decision. The subtlest decision is whether we are to follow this inclination or that inclination. At that level, that is a very basic level. That's in the level of our will. But other decisions that we make, that is, many decisions we make are grosser decisions. Decisions are driven by our will. What do we want? So the decisions are not our will. The decisions are actions that we do as a result of our will. Even at the subtle level, when I say we are free to choose whether to follow this vasana or that vasana, whether to be swayed by this vasana or that vasana, that decision is according to our will. For example, in the case I gave, where there's some opportunity for us to get money by some dishonest means, but nobody will know about, and we may feel tempted to get that money. Just for example, I say that. We then have a choice whether we follow that inclination and take that money, or we follow the inclination of our conscience and refrain from doing so because we feel it's dishonest and it may cause some harm to someone along the line. So we've got those two, we've got inclination pulling us in two directions. But ultimately, which inclination we choose to follow is according to our will. Do we want to do something dishonest and live with the guilt of it, or do we want to do the honest thing? So this is just an example. This is happening at every moment in our life. That constantly vasanas are arising. We have inclinations to do this. We have inclinations to do that. Many of them are not even ethical decisions. But for example, do we, when worrying thoughts arise in our mind, do we allow ourselves to dwell on those worrying thoughts and be miserable? Or do we just decide, okay, these things are not in my hands. Leave it to Bhagavan. Whatever happens is according to his will. So we don't allow our mind to be swayed by that inclination to worry unnecessarily, because we surrender it to Bhagavan. So in this way, both surrender and self-investigation both depend upon our freedom of will, our freedom to choose which vasanas to follow, whether outward-going vasanas or inward-going vasanas. Among the outward-going vasanas, whether vasanas to worry about this or to leave it to Bhagavan. There's so many different things. Those, whether we follow one vasana or another, that is according to our will. So to pretend that thoughts arise without our control, okay, we may not consciously decide I'm going to think this, and that it seems to us, but thoughts are coming. Thoughts arise of their own accord, but from where are they arising? They're arising from our vasanas, from our inclination, because we have an inclination to worry, for example. The worrying thoughts arise in our mind. So, but all these things, nobody can compel us to worry. Just again, an example, no one can compel us to worry unnecessarily. If we worry about anything, it's because we have yielded to the inclination to worry about those things. Why should we yield ourselves to those inclinations? The only inclination, according to Bhagavan, the only inclination we should yield ourselves to is that inclination to subside, that satvasana, the inclination to subside and just be as we actually are. So having freedom of will is absolutely fundamental. But the will in its subtlest form is vasanas. The vasanas rise as likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, and so on. They in turn blossom as other types of, as grosser thoughts. And when people talk about, that is, nowadays, scientists are trying to understand how the mind works. They do, the neuroscientists and such people, they tried to see, is there any scope for such a thing as free will? Right? That is their idea of free will, is whether we consciously make a decision or not. And some experiments seem to show that we are aware of a decision to act only after the decision has been made. I don't know, they have their own experiments, their own ways, but these are their ways of interpreting it. But the gross level of a decision is prompted by what? Whatever we decide, it is according to our vasanas, our inclinations. That if we decide this rather than this, it's because of our inclination towards that towards what we decide is stronger than our inclination to something else. So it all begins at a very, very subtle level. For the outward going mind, it may seem that we may not be able to perceive these things, but the more we turn within, the more we try to cling firmly to self-attentiveness, the more we will recognize the workings of the vasanas, how they lead us away from ourselves, and how we can cling to self-attentiveness and not allow ourselves to be swayed by ourselves, by the vasanas. These are the skills we gain by the persistent practice of self-investigation and self-surrender. So many people believe that because people who've recorded what Bhagavan said, they often didn't understand the nuances of what he said. For example, here, Evan, you've referred to, if Bhagavan said the person willingly dropping the fan is only their destiny chosen by the ordainer, it has been recorded that when Bhagavan was asked something about a fan, is it if it's For example, is my picking up this fan and fanning myself, is that destiny? When we pick up a fan and fan ourselves, we experience a certain. Why do we pick up a fan? Because it's hot, and we want to cool ourselves down, so we pick it up and fan ourselves. We wouldn't, though we may want to cool ourselves down, we wouldn't be able to pick up that fan and fan ourselves and thereby enjoy that coolness if it was not our destiny to enjoy that coolness at that moment. So the destiny is an influencing thing, but that doesn't mean that our will is bound by destiny. So the subtle nuances in what Bhagavan taught us about will and fate are not were not understood by many people, and therefore they were not recorded correctly. There's one incident in talks recorded in talks where a certain devotee was sitting on the rocks on the foot of a hill in the hot sunshine. And this was brought to Bhagavan's attention. And Bhagavan said, people who come here, they do whatever they want. Then, I can't remember exactly, I'm not exactly quoting it. Actually, let me find that portion in talks and then I can, yes, this is in talk number 1, that is in section 190 of talks, on the 30th of May, 1936. There is a pet squirrel in the hall, which usually retires into its cage before nightfall. Just as Maharshi was telling it to retire for the night, a visitor who had announced that he had attained the transcendent consciousness suggested that water may be offered to it, since it was likely to be thirsty on this hot evening. His presumption to understand animals evoked no response. He repeated it. After a few minutes' silence, Maharshi said, "You are probably thirsty after your long meditation in the hot sun on the hotter rocks, and you would like to drink a jug of water." The devotee replied, "Quite so, I have taken water." And Bhagavan said, "The squirrel is not so thirsty. Because you were practicing austerities in the heat of the sun, you should feel thirsty. Why you prescribe it for the squirrel?" Bhagavan added, "I noticed him standing on the hot rocks facing the sun with eyes closed. I stood there for a while, but did not want to disturb him and came away. These people do as they please." And the devotee then commented, what I did not intend beforehand. It was spontaneous. And Bhagavan says, "Oh, I see. Whatever we others do, we do with intention. You seem to have transcended all." And the devotee says, "This is not the first time I did so. You yourself inspire me and make me do these things, yet you ask me why I did it. How is it?" Bhagavan says, "I see you are doing actions controlled by me, and the fruits should also be considered similarly mine and not yours." The devotee says, so they are undoubtedly. I act not of my free will, but inspired by you. I have no will of my own." The devotee says, and Bhagavan says, "Enough of this rubbish." I mean, he quotes something that Duryodhana said in the Mahabharata. And he goes on to say, "What's the difference between you two?" Meaning between you and Duryodhana. And the devotee says, "I see no difference, but I have no will and act without it." And Bhagavan says, "You have risen high above the common run. We others are acting with personal will." And the devotee says, "How, sir? You said in one of your works that action can be automatic." And Bhagavan says, "Enough, enough. You and another visitor behave as transcendental beings. You are both fully learned. You need not learn more. I would not have said all this had you not been coming here frequently. Do as you please, but these eccentricities at the beginner stage will become known in their true light after some time." And the devotee said, "But I've been in this state for such a long time." And Bhagavan says, "Enough." So when this devotee claims to be acting without free will, Bhagavan says, "Enough of this rubbish." So anyone who believes they're acting without free will is deluding themselves. If we had truly surrendered our will, we cannot truly surrender our will so long as we rise as ego. So long as we rise as ego, we have vasanas, and inevitably they'll give rise to likes, dislikes, and so on. We can reduce the strength of our outward going vasanas, but we cannot surrender them entirely without surrendering their root, namely ego. If we have truly surrendered ourselves, then we have no will, but then no I will rise to say I act with not of my free will. So long as we have the feeling I am acting, we are doing so according to our will. So anyone who tried to deny that we have will, Bhagavan's response was, enough of this rubbish. So the people who recorded things didn't always record exactly, they didn't record all the nuances. So many of the things, and then people take something, Bhagavan is recorded in such and such a book by Devaraj Mudliya, but Bhagavan said even picking up a fan is according to destiny. And they then extrapolate, therefore there's no free will at all. Bhagavan never ever said there is no such thing as freedom of will. In fact, Bhagavan talked about this subject very precisely. He talked about, firstly, he distinguished freedom of will from freedom of action. Freedom of will is he called Icha Swatantra. Freedom of action, he called Kriya Swatantra. These are two separate things. We must have freedom of, freedom of action means freedom to do as we want. Freedom of action would be meaningless if we didn't have freedom of will. If we weren't free to want what we want, it would be meaningless to say we're free to do as we want, because if the will isn't free, the actions also won't be free. But according to Bhagavan, we do have freedom of will. We also have freedom of action within certain limits. Obviously, we can't do, we may want to do certain things that we, for one reason or another, we're not able to do. So we can want whatever we want. We've got unlimited freedom to want anything we want, but we don't have freedom to do everything we want. We have freedom to do many of the things we want, but our freedom to act is limited. But though we have limited freedom to act, we don't have freedom to change what we are destined to experience, even an iota. That is, whatever we are to experience, that means whatever is to happen to us is determined by prarabdha. We cannot experience anything that we're not destined to experience, and we cannot avoid experiencing anything that we are destined to experience. As Bhagavan said in the note he wrote for his mother, that is, what is never to happen will not happen, however much effort one makes. What is not to happen, what is to happen will not stop, however much obstruction we make. That means we are free to make effort, but we are not free to actually experience any. I can, for example, I can want to be President of the United States. I can make all effort to be President of the United States, but if it's not my destiny to be President of the United States, it is not going to happen, however much I want it and however much I try to achieve it. So we have the freedom to want it. We have the freedom to try for it, but we don't have the freedom to experience it unless it is in our destiny. If something is in our destiny, we will definitely experience it. So long as we allow our mind to go outwards, that is. If something is not in our destiny, however much we may want it and try for it, it's not going to happen. So according to Bhagavan, we have freedom of will, we also have destiny. These are not at all incompatible, because the freedom of will decides what we want to experience. Destiny decides what we are to experience. They're two different things. There's so many things we want to experience, but we're not destined to experience, and therefore they're never going to experience. There are so many things that we're destined to experience, even though we may not want to experience them. So what we want to experience and what we are destined to, what we are to experience, are two totally different domains. They don't clash at all. Bhagavan has also, in that same note to his mother, Bhagavan said, in the first sentence, according to the prarabdha of each person, he who is for that will make them dance, he says, literally. That means he'll make them act. He who is for that, being there, he said. That means Being there means implies being in the heart of each one. So those actions, what does that mean? That is, in order to experience our destiny, supposing it is my destiny to become president of the United States, I have to stand for election, I have to become popular, I have to do so many things in order to become president of the United States. If it's my destiny to become president of the United States, I'll be made to do whatever actions are necessary in order for that to experience that being the president of the United States. So whatever actions are necessary in order for us to experience what is destined, those actions will be made to do. Bhagavan never said all actions that you do are driven by destiny. Bhagavan said that most of the actions we do are driven by our vasanas, by our yielding to our outward going vasanas. And just because, supposing it's my destiny, say I want to become a doctor, and it's my destiny to become a doctor. In order to become a doctor, I have to study. Since it's my destiny to become a doctor, my destiny will make me, I will be made to do those actions that are necessary to study and to pass the exams and everything, but are necessary to become a doctor. But just because those actions are driven by destiny, doesn't mean they are not also driven by our will. Because most people who become doctors, they become doctors. Obviously, it's because of their destiny. They couldn't become a doctor if it wasn't their destiny to become a doctor. But most people who become doctors want to become doctors for some reason or other. They may want the social prestige of being a doctor. They may want to help. They may like the idea of helping others, or they may think, as a doctor, I can earn lots of money, so I can. So they may have their own reasons for wanting to become a doctor, but most probably they want to become a doctor. So their actions they do to become a doctor are driven both by their destiny and by their will. Like that, so many actions we do are may be driven by both, but that is every action we almost every action we do is driven by vasanas. This is why Bhagavan said in verse 2 of Upadesha Undiyar, Bhagavan said, the fruit of action passing away remains as seed and casts one into the ocean of action, into the great ocean of action. What does he mean by remain as seed? The seeds are the vasanas. That is, if we do certain actions, supposing you have a liking to watch football, say, whenever your opportunity is there, you'll either watch it on television or you'll buy the ticket and go to the match and everything. But if it's your destiny to watch, say, 200 football matches in your life, you cannot, during the course of your life, you will watch 200 football matches, no more, no less. That you are destined to experience. But even after that destiny to experience those football matches are there, even when you're becoming too old to go to a football match and you're too poor to buy a television to watch it, so you're no longer able to watch football matches, but the liking to watch football matches is still there because it's been cultivated through this life. Because the more you watch football matches, the stronger your liking to watch football matches. So this is how actions leave, when we follow certain vasanas, we are strengthening those vasanas and cultivating more vasanas of that type. So it's the vasanas that lead us, that make us fall into the ocean of action. According to the law of karma as taught by Bhagavan, there are three types of karma. This is the standard in Advaita philosophy and many other Indian systems of philosophy. There is agamya, sanchita, and prarabdha. Agamya means the actions we do according to our will. If we do an action, but it's only according to destiny and not according to our will, that is not agamya, that will not bear fruit. But any action that we do willingly, we do according to our will, we do with volition, that is agamya. It is only agamya that bears fruit. The fruit of agamya get stored in what is called sanchita. Sanchita means a heap or pile. That's the store of all the fruits of our past action, but we have not yet experienced. From sanchita, God, in each life, God selects certain fruit for us to experience in this lifetime. So the prarabdha, the destiny, is the fruit of agamya, but we've done in previous lives. Agamya means actions we've done by our will. So even the destiny is the fruit of actions that we've done by our will. So ultimately, the whole law of karma is based upon the fact that we have a will and that we act according to our will. So people who believe that Bhagavan taught that we have no free will have completely misunderstood Bhagavan. As Bhagavan said to that man who was meditating in the hot sun, enough of this nonsense. It's pretending that anyone who deludes themselves into thinking that they have no freedom of will and that whatever actions they're doing are driven only by some higher power, are driven only by God, that is the worst type of delusion. The first thing we need to recognize, yes, we do have a will, we do have vasana, we do have inclination to go out. Why does our mind go outwards? Why people say, I was meditating, and when I was meditating, thoughts popped up and disturbed my meditation. Thoughts don't pop up of their own accord. Why thoughts rise? Because we allow our mind to be carried away by certain inclinations which rise in the form of those thoughts. So it's the whole of the spiritual, Bhagavan said, the whole of the spiritual path is just a battle within our own will between the sat vasana and all the Vishaya vasanas. Bhagavan, in Guru Vachakavai, there's a verse in which Murgana recorded Bhagavan as saying, but in the Puranas, in the mythological stories of India, there's often mention about battles between the Devas and the Asuras. Devas means the gods, the divine beings, or good, basically good souls, and Asuras means the demons, the wicked souls. So this fight between the good and the evil, between the Devas and the Asuras, what is depicted in those stories is nothing but the fight that is going on in the will of the sadhaka. The fight between the inclination to go outwards, the Vishaya vasanas, and the inclination to come back within, to subside within and surrender ourselves. So the whole of spiritual life is a battle within our own will. So to pretend that we don't have a will, or that we've got no freedom of will, is if we believe that, how can we follow what Bhagavan has taught us? We need to recognize, yes, we do have a will. The will consists of vasanas. We have the choice whether we allow ourselves to be carried away by outward going vasanas, or whether we choose to cultivate, by practice of self-investigation and self-surrender, cultivate that sat vasana, which alone will enable us to subside back into our source. And then in another comment, the same friend Evan asked, also, forgive me if this seems silly, but if you consider Gödel's incompleteness theorems, this may not be as superficial as it seems. Let's say that I do have free will. Okay, in that case, I will, but I no longer have free will. What becomes of me now? I don't think type theory is going to save us from that paradox. Or has Michael James already addressed this somewhere I haven't seen yet? I don't know about Gödel's incompleteness theorems. I think that's something to do with some very advanced mathematics that I know nothing about. I also don't know what is meant by type theory. But regarding this idea, if I have free will, then I will, but I no longer have free will. Firstly, as I say, free will, the term free will is a very confused term. What do you mean by free will? Do you mean freedom of will? If you have freedom of will, you may want not to have freedom of will, but you still have freedom of will. Just because you want not to have freedom of will doesn't stop you having freedom of will. That is, the fact that you want to to be free of this freedom of will, you're exercising your freedom of will in order to want to be free of the freedom of will. So just because you want something doesn't mean you're going to achieve it. Even external things. Regarding freedom of will, that is our very nature as ego. We have freedom of will. What we should try to give up is not our freedom of will, but wanting anything other than to surrender ourselves completely to Bhagavan. In other words, we need to, the path of surrender begins with surrendering one's will to the will of God. That is, whatever is happening in our life. In other words, our whole prarabdha is according to the will of God, because it's God who has selected our prarabdha for us to experience. But we all have the nature of ego to have likes and dislikes. So certain things that we are destined to experience, we like. Certain things that we dislike. And so we have a natural inclination to try to experience more of the things we like and to avoid the things that we dislike. This is how the will normally functions. When we begin on the path to surrender, we understand my will is coming between me and God, because God has willed certain things for me, but I don't like those. Some of the things he's willed for me, I like. Some I don't like. So because so long as I have likes and dislikes, my will is in conflict with God's will. So I must try and surrender my will to the will of God. So we try to give up our likes, dislikes, desires, and attachments. By cultivating love for God, we can do so to a certain extent. We can reduce the strength of our likes, dislikes, desires, and attachments. We can become willing to accept whatever happens. Okay, this is, even if I don't like this, it is given to me by God for my own good. Therefore, because I love God, I accept whatever he wills for me is for my good. In this way, we can, to some extent, reduce the strength of our likes, dislikes, and so on. But we cannot be completely free of likes and dislikes, so long as the one who has likes and dislikes survives. The one who has likes and dislikes, the root of all of the will is only ourself as ego. So long as we rise as ego, we will inevitably have, to a greater or lesser extent, likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, fears, and so on. If we want to surrender our will completely to God, or completely to Guru, completely to Bhagavan, we need to surrender ourselves to Bhagavan. Only when ego is surrendered is the will completely surrendered. So it sounds very nice in theory. In that case, I will, but I no longer have free will. We can want to surrender our will, but it's not so easy. And in order to, it requires, that is, self-investigation and self-surrender both require practice. It is only by practice that we can learn, we can gain the love to turn within and to turn towards ourselves, and thereby subside back within, and thereby weaken the outward going inclinations. But it's not just a matter of deciding one day, okay, I will, but I have no will. I will, but I surrender to God. It would be very nice if we could surrender to God, but the fact is, so long as we still have strong Vishaya vasanas, even though we may have a liking to surrender ourselves to God, because we have Vishaya vasanas, we also have a liking to go outwards. Right? So our will is in, different elements of our will are in conflict with each other. So it would be impossible for us just to sit down one day and decide, okay, I will, but I no longer have free will. We don't have such freedom. In order to gain the freedom to surrender our will, we need to practice self-investigation and self-surrender. That is the whole purpose of it. But we cannot surrender our will completely until we surrender the root of our will. Namely ego. So what is our aim? Our aim is to surrender. Ultimately, what is our aim? It is only to surrender ego. How do we surrender ego? That is where the path of self-investigation comes in, because according to Bhagavan, the nature of ego is what? As he says in verse 25 of Uludunaptu, grasping. The ego is a formless phantom. It's got no form of its own. It's got no substance of its own. It borrowed its substance from Satchit, what we really are. We borrow our existence and our awareness from Satchit, because we're all aware of ourselves as I am. That which is shiny in us as I am, that is Satchit. So we take that I am as our own, and we also have no form of our own. That's why Bhagavan calls ego a formless phantom. So just as we have misappropriated I am, the awareness of our own existence, Satchit, as our own, we also misappropriate the form of a body of our own. So Bhagavan says, grasping form, this talking about ego, grasping form, it comes into existence. Grasping form, it stands. Grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes abundantly. Leaving form, it grasps form. If sought, it takes flight. Such is the nature of this formless phantom ego. So what do we have to understand from this? What is grasping form? The ego is a formless phantom. So all forms are things other than itself. Forms here doesn't just mean material forms. All thoughts, feelings, perceptions, memories, all are forms. So everything other than the fundamental awareness I am is a form. Ego rises grasping these forms. First, it grasps a body as itself. As I said earlier, a body is a form composed of 5 sheaths: physical form, life, mind, intellect, and will. This bundle of 5 sheaths we take as ourself. So that's, we grasp that as ourself, and then we come into existence and stand grasping this form. And we not only do we grasp this form, our attention is constantly going outward, grasping other forms. That is, grasping here means attending to or being aware of. So we're constantly, the nature of ego is grasping form. So long as we are grasping form, we are nourishing and sustaining ego. So how to surrender ego? We need to give up grasping form. But merely giving up grasping form is not a solution, because every day when we fall asleep, when we're too tired to continue projecting and grasping form, we subside into sleep. But ego isn't thereby annihilated. So to annihilate ego, we need to do more than just let go of all forms. We need to attend to ourselves. That's why Bhagavan says, Tedinal otum pitikam. That means if sought, it takes flight. The nature of ego is such that so long as we're looking outwards, away from ourselves, we seem to be ego, and we are nourishing and sustaining ego. If we turn our attention away from all other things, back towards ourselves, ego will thereby subside and dissolve back into its source. That's what he means by it takes flight. So how are we to surrender this ego? Only by turning our attention back towards ourselves. But in order to do so, we need great love. We need bhakti. That's why Bhagavan always used to say, bhakti is the mother of jnana. What is bhakti? Bhakti is our will. If we have no freedom of will, even bhakti is not in our hands. But the whole purpose of all of our sadhana is about cultivating bhakti. Bhakti is what is otherwise called satvasana, that inclination just to subside and be as we actually are. So it's all a matter of our will. So anyone who thinks that Bhagavan has taught that we don't have free will has completely misunderstood Bhagavan's teachings. The fact that we have free will is one of the fundamental principles of Bhagavan's teachings. Yes, it's true that we can't, however much we want to experience certain things, we cannot experience what we want, anything other than what is destined to experience. But that doesn't, just because we are destined to experience will experience, so long as our mind is going outward, doesn't mean that we don't have freedom of will. We have a will and we have freedom of will. Are we going to yield ourselves to, our will consists of vasanas. Vasanas are pulling us in many different directions. Which vasanas are we going to yield to? Are we going to yield to the Vishaya vasanas that drag our mind outwards? Or are we going to yield more and more to the Satvasana. The more we yield to any particular vasana, the more we strengthen that vasana. So if we yield ourselves to this Satvasana, this inclination to turn back within, the more we yield ourselves to it, the more we surrender by turning our attention inwards, the more we strengthen that and we weaken all the outward going vasanas. So it's the whole of the practice of Bhagavan's teachings is all about how we use our will. Another point, a related point to this is all spiritual sadhana, whether self-investigation or any other, or self-surrender or any other type of spiritual practice, the goal is always said to be purification of the mind. Other spiritual practices can, like bhakti and so on, they can give only purification of mind, whereas self-investigation and self-surrender give not only purification of mind, but also ultimately eradication of mind, eradication of ego. What is meant by purification of mind? It is said chitta suddhi. Chittam means our will. Impurities in our will are our vasana, our vishaya vasanas, our outward going inclinations. So those, when the mind is purified to the extent that the vishaya vasanas are weakened and the satvasana is strengthened. So this is the aim of all types of spiritual practice, not only self-investigation and self-surrender. Ultimately, all spiritual practices are about purifying the mind. Other spiritual practices can purify the mind to a certain extent. That is, to a certain extent by bhakti. Bhakti, I'm here talking about bhakti towards God as another, the anya bhava, as Bhagavan says in verse 8 of Upadeshundya, that by so long as we take God to be something other than ourselves and love God as something other than ourselves, we can weaken our vishaya vasanas to a certain extent. But in order to eradicate vishaya vasanas entirely, we need to eradicate their root ego. And the only way to eradicate ego is by turning our attention back within. That's why Bhagavan says in the 13th paragraph of Nana, being firmly established as Atmanishtaparam, as one who's being Atmanishtaparam, one who is firmly established as oneself, giving not even the slightest room to the rising of any thought other than Atmachintana, which literally means thought of oneself, but implies self-attentiveness. That is giving oneself to God. So surrender, Bhagavan clearly says there, we can surrender ourself, ego, the root of all vishaya vasanas, only by clinging to ourselves so keenly, but we thereby give not even the slightest room to the rising of any other thought. So this is surrender. So this is how to overcome the outward going inclination of our mind and to cultivate the satvasana. We need to practice this path of self-investigation and self-surrender more and more and more. That is the only way in which we can surrender our will. So long as the root of the will remains, there will be, that is, so long as there is ego, the very nature of ego is to have vishaya vasanas. We can weaken the vishaya vasanas, but we cannot get rid of them entirely without getting rid of ego. So, Evan, I hope this adequately answers your questions.